So after having a little discussion about the background, the meaning of colonialism, as well as the background on the establishment of colonialism, let us now start our topic with the first subtopic, that is scramble for and the partition of Africa. So dear students, on the process of establishment of colonialism in Africa, it was passed through different stages or different activities, different events. As we know that history is all about events. So the first event on the establishment of colonialism in Africa was the scramble for and the partition of Africa. And this is our first subtopic in our topic. So scramble, here in this subtopic we have these words like scramble as well as partition of Africa. So when you are talking about the concept of scramble, the scramble means fighting or struggling of something. So there is something here, while everyone needs on that, then these people fight or struggling against this thing. So the incidence or process of fighting against something is what we refer as scramble. So scramble means fighting or struggling of something. So it is simply and a clear, short definition. It has consists about fighting or struggling of something. So only three words, which are too easy to claim and understand. That is the meaning of scramble. While the partition, now partition means dividing of something into pieces or portion. So partition now means dividing. We divide then. Which thing that we are fighting, we now decide to divide it into pieces or portions. So partition means dividing of something into pieces or portion. As I said, if there is a piece of bread here, while everyone of us is in need of that bread, then you say no, there is a need of fighting. There is no need of fighting. Let us make partition. Let us divide it so that everybody can get what is supposed to get. So the process of making division, partition, dividing that thing into pieces or portion is what is referred as partition. Now, scramble for and the partition of Africa. What does it mean by scramble for and the partition of Africa? So scramble and the partition of Africa was struggling. It was a process of struggling and the dividing of Africa amongst European imperialist nations. So it was a process whereby those European states or countries were got into war to fight so that they can get those African nations or African colonies. So it was a process of struggling and the dividing of African amongst European imperialist nations such as British or Britain, German, France, Italy, Portugal, Spain, and others. So that is the meaning of scramble for and partition. So it involved the fighting, it involved the wars. So there are several wars which colonialists fought so that they could get those African colonies or African nations. And the incidence, it was during the 19th century. It happened during the 19th century due to the Industrial Revolution in Europe. As you have discussed during the previous lesson on how industrialization or industrial revolution led to the colonization of Africa. So colonization of Africa was the result of industrial revolution. So industrial revolution now led to the scramble for and partition of Africa. At the first stage on the establishment of colonialism in Africa. So let us now discuss those factors for the scramble for independence. Why factors? Why scramble for independence? Why scramble for independence of Africa? Why not in America, Asia, and the other continents? So you are most welcome to discuss those factors for the scramble for independence of Africa. So let us proceed with the factors for the scramble for independence of Africa. So the scramble for independence of Africa was the result of numbers of views or concepts, include Afrocentric views or school of thought, as well as Eurocentric views or school of thoughts. So two groups of scholars have discussed the factors for the scramble for independence. Why scramble for independence of Africa? So let us now start to have our discussion with the Afrocentric views. So these views are given by Africans. So Africans themselves have tried to discuss, to explain those factors for the scramble for independence. Why colonialists moved from Europe to Africa and start to struggle, start to fight, start to have a war for the African colonies. And for them, or Africans, said that scramble for independence of Africa was the result of industrial revolution in Europe. It was the result of industrial revolution in Europe. Or other words, we say it was the result of economic interest of most of European states, most of European countries. Since they had the problem of their economic interest, they had no way instead of moving to Africa and start fighting for African colonies. And because of those problems or those economic interests, such as raw materials, market, areas for investment, cheap labor, as well as areas for settlement. So these 5 demands made them into coming to Africa and start fighting or struggling for African colonies or African continent as the result of scramble for and partition of Africa. And the evidence of this is in those different books that were written by Africans. So those Africans have written their own books which explain or try to trace back those factors why colonialists moved from Europe to Africa. And once they came in Africa, they started to fight for the African colonies. And there are some evidences such as the existence of those companies. And so those companies show that they had their own purpose, and those purposes were fighting for the African market, for their manufactured goods which were produced in Europe. Again, existence of missionary centers, different of missionary centers which are found in Africa, were the result of those missionaries who came in Africa to find out those important economic interest for colonialists. Even the emergence of European big farms, those farms, big plantations which were established in Africa, this shows that At that time, colonialists came in Africa so that to find raw materials. That's why they opened those big farms. Like in Tanganyika, they cultivated sisal plantation. Kenya, there was cotton plantation, whereby in Tanganyika they established the so-called plantation agriculture, while in Kenya they established the settler agriculture, which we will discuss in the third topic, that is establishment of colonial economy in Africa. So these 5 economic demands or economic interests led to the scramble for and partition of Africa during the 19th century. Let us discuss, or let us proceed with Eurocentric views or school of thoughts. Yes. So in Eurocentric views, these were against the Afrocentric views. Europeans themselves, they are also explained with the factors why they came in Africa to have the scramble for and partition of Africa. Why did they come in Africa at that time and started fighting themselves against the African colonies? So these are their views now. So Europeans said those Afrocentric views are not true, are not correct, that they came in Africa to fight out those economic interests such as raw materials, market, areas for investment, areas for settlement, as well as cheap labor. So they said, no. We didn't come in Africa to find those demands. We were satisfied for ourselves. While we came in Africa because of the following reasons. So these are Eurocentric views. So Europeans say that they came in Africa so as to civilize Africa. Again, they came because of European balance of power. Also, they came because of the development of European nationalism. Development of European nationalism, as well as the national prestige, Also, they came to abolish slavery and slave trade. Those points like that, as well as to spread Christianity. So for them, they are against with the Afrocentric views. They are against with the Africans' views, as Africans claimed that Europeans came to Africa because of their economic interest, but they themselves say no, so they protest, they reject against the African views. So according to Europe, they say that at that time Africa was a dark continent. It was a dark continent. Those Africans had poor standard of life. They had no any kind of civilizations. They had no any kind of development. Africa was barbaric. Europeans say that at that time Africa was barbaric. Were ignorant. Africans had no history. Had no any kind of civilization. any kind of civilization. So they just lived totally as how those monkeys or other animals do live. So because of that, now they had to come in Africa so that they could change African standard of life from being non-humanism or non-human life into humanism or into human life, as the result of having these numbers of factors, such as the need to civilize Africa. So they just said that they came in Africa so that they could civilize Africa. They could, in Kiswahili we say, kuwastaarabisha. So they came kuwastaarabisha wa Africa, since at that time Africans were lived in primitive life, primitive ways of life. So there was no need. That's why Europeans came to civilize them. So while they came to civilize the Africans, then it happened that scramble for and the partition of Africa. Again, another point was European balance of power. They had to balance their power, since at that time most of European countries were fighting for the power. And historically, we can trace that before 1870 to 1871, the power were under two states, European states, which were British and France, before that year. But this power was now collapsed or failed after the emergence of newly powerful states, which were German and Italy. And these states got into power after their unification that were made during this year, 1870 to 1871, which we are talking about German and Italy unification. So their unification made them into stronger and powerful states or countries. So after being stronger now, they had to meet their interest. They had to get power as how these two states, which were British and France, had. So in getting their power now, they had to find as much as possible, as many colonies in Africa. Then it happened the war between German and France, and this war was called the FrancoPrussian War. FrancoPrussian War at the same year. So at that war, France lost her two provinces or colonies, which were located in America. We are talking about Alsace and Lorraine. So after losing now these two provinces, France had to find out other places where she could get those colonies. And the only place where she could get those colonies was Africa. That is why they were now looking forward African continent so that they could get those colonies. So while France was wanted to compensate with her two lost colonies, at the same time German had the interest of increasing the numbers of colonies. Not only German, even Italy. So in managing or balancing their power now led to the scramble for and the partition of Africa. That is point number 2. Then the European balance of power. They need to balance power. Since they have lost their colony in America, especially French, so she just wanted to compensate, to balance, to make it equal number of colonies, equal number of power as how German, Italy, British got at that point. So another point was development of European nationalism. Dear students, when we are talking about European nationalism, is different from African nationalism. Since nationalism in Africa, we mean that fighting for the African colonies. I mean, fighting for the African freedom, so that to remove any kind of colonial domination and to make the government under the control of themselves. That is African nationalism. So in short, nationalism in Africa, or African nationalism, was the process of fighting African to fight for their independence, to fight for their freedom. But this is contrary from European nationalism, simply because European nationalism refers to the unification of smallest states to form the strong state. Particularly here, we will much focus on German and Italy unification, as I said at the previous point. So, because of the unification now that were made during 1870 and 1871, marked them into having the interest of having a lot of colonies, as how other stronger European nations had. Especially we are talking about British and French. So in having that interest of maintaining or having many colonies, led to the scramble for and partition of Africa. Since after that unification, Germany and Italy, they became stronger, more than stronger nations. Then they had rapid industrialization. They were in need again of rapid economic growth, as well as rapid militarism. So in meeting their interests, they had to find those colonies which could provide them a wealth. So after getting wealth, then they were easier to get those industrialization as well as rapid economic growth. So that development of European nationalism had played a great role towards the scramble for and partition of Africa. Another factor was national prestige. National prestige. In national prestige here, we are meaning about hadhi. Prestige means hadhi. So this means hadhi ya taifa. So here, it is just like those European nations came to fight for the colonies in Africa, so that to maintain national prestige, to maintain the national pride, national proud of, since they believed that for any European country which could possess many colonies than any other, it is a sign and a symbol of that country to be much powerful than any other. So because of having that interest or that idea, marked them into having the interest of fighting as much as many colonies as possible, so that a country could get its respect, could have a respect. For example, those countries like Germany. So Germany wished to have many colonies than any European country, than any other European country, so that he could gain the respect, he could gain the national pride that Germany is much strongest, it is the most strongest country. Why? Simply because has 75% of African colonies. So because of having that interest of national prestige, made them into scramble for and partition of Africa. Another point was the need to abolish slavery and slave trade in Africa. That is to say, they came in Africa so as to abolish slavery and slave trade and introduce the so-called, that was called legal trade. Legal trade. That was believed that the trade which was preferred by God, since they believed that slave trade was not human trade, was not was not assigned that human rights. So it was believed that slave trade was against God's willing or plan, since those slaves were badly treated. So they now came at that time so that they could civilize people about the evils of slave trade, so that they could abolish, they could stop it. So in having that interest, they made themselves under the pressure of scramble for and partition of Africa. Another factor was the need to spread Christianity or Christian religion. So they believed that for those who could spread religion, God could prize them. So because of the need of heaven, every European nation had the interest of spreading that religion in any African colony or state. So because of that, led to the scramble for and partition of Africa. So these are factors for the scramble for and partition of Africa. So let us now have a question or task which will make us into good understanding of that first our subtopic. So after having discussion for the scramble for and the partition of Africa, particularly on the factors for the scramble for and the partition, let us now have a task. That is briefly explain 8 factors for the scramble for and the partition of Africa. So once a student will be able to describe briefly, explain or describe those factors for the scramble for and the partition of Africa, then we will say he or she has attained our specific objective of our lesson. So thank you very much for your time. Let us meet other session. Thank you.